Good evening. Apologize, I meant to put this up last week. But it was talking about, this week I'm going to have you talk about in discussion pretty extensively about Mary Pipher. And there's a number of chapters in here. I kind of like to look at the overview. Last year in the summer, I came up with a chart, and I'm going to look around for it. I have it on my desktop. And it was kind of a chart for advocacy because it was in my TE 825 civil rights class in the summer. And I think that, to get any good out of taking classes like that, and, I know that on banks, they talk about that first level surface culture where with young kids, you present things like different foods or colorful, interesting things about diversity. And then you progress further on, and then you try to impact and bring people together. And in this textbook, of course, she's bringing together, as the term culture broker is huge here. She's acting very involved to understand the complexity of being a refugee, or whether you call it an immigrant, or whether you call it a documented, undocumented, legal, however you want to call it, being that person who is the other who comes into a new place. And a number of you have already gone through this situation. You have experienced this in a very mild way, hopefully, just moving from one state to another, even one city to another. But you notice differences. They're not trauma, but here we're talking trauma. We're talking everything from rape and murder of family relatives, torture, whether it's in the Middle East or at the hands of coyotes smuggling people into the United States. And coyotes, I'm not talking about the animal, I'm talking the name for the people. They're supposedly the guides that lead you into the United States, whatever these smugglers are. And they exist everywhere. You just read of the tragedy in England of 39 people found dead in a truck that in England, where they were being smuggled in, they suffocated. Horrible, horrible situation. The demeaning and lessening of the value of the human life is horrible. So what do? I mean, Mary, I love this book because it puts a human face on everything, and it forces you to think about their dilemma, because these individuals have all the Maslow needs, hierarchy of needs. They have everything from the basics of food and water to shelter to relationships, marriage, sex, whatever you want to call it, dating, to friendships, to the physical needs, of course, having a car, being able to get to work, being able to earn a living, because there's a very short limit even on the aid for those that are here as refugees. They don't get a free ride for the rest of their life, contrary to what people may ridiculously say. So you're dealing with the whole context of one human life or several human lives trying to go from where they had their needs met to some extent and to go to a place where they don't know how to meet any of their needs. They have to be taught everything. There's a really nice little section on here on page 91. It's just a list. How to shop at a grocery store, fill out a job application. What are vitamins? How do you interview? How do you get how do you use a refrigerator? Some people don't have that access, depending on where they're from. I have a video I haven't shown you. I probably won't put it up, but it's about people, the Bantu, who lived in the Somali area, and they were actually more or less historically slaves or the lower class of another African country. So they had nothing. I mean, didn't have electricity. They had lessons on how to turn on the lights. You flip a switch. People had never seen electricity. They didn't know what it was. What is everything to that? Politics, hot weather. What are roast marshmallows and s'mores? How do you make s'mores? How do you carve a pumpkin? Why is there Halloween? What is Thanksgiving? What is Easter? You know, they wouldn't understand, even though they may not be of that religion, or they might. They would, just because you're Christian doesn't mean you share the same holidays as another country. They might have a whole different set of holidays or how they celebrate them. This immense amount of information is so exhausting, both to share it with someone, because you have to overcome, obviously, the language, context, and excuse me, I'm just going to say yes to this. Okay, as you're writing about this, and I want you to put the context within your own community, because Mary talks about the Laughing Sisters. She talks about that Sycamore School in Minnesota. We had adolescent kids of all different ages and from different countries that were trying to go to school. Think about class control and class management in that room. You're dealing with traumatized individuals. Trauma is something that's not dealt with very well, or not spoken of very much. Several reasons. One is that people don't share it because of the shame. How often would you even share something like being tortured or being beaten? It's not like you want to bring that out. You want to show your best self and be positive. And some of the things have been done to refugees, all ages, both sexes, are so horrible that they won't even be discussed. It will not come up. And if it does, there actually was a situation where the people were so tortured by ISIS, the group in Syria that supposedly we have defeated. They were so horrible to families, to women, to children, that individuals, American individuals or Canadian individuals that dealt with these individuals and heard their stories themselves were traumatized. When the trauma is so horrible that to share it is to, in a way, kind of inflict it on somebody else. I mean, to where they actually have to have counseling just to deal with it. It reminds you of the high level of trauma. It's like emergency personnel that deal with terrible accidents or war, the trauma of war, because terrible things happen to the body, terrible things are done, you know. So that's what you're dealing with. So I think you have to think, you know, if you're going to be a cultural broker, what level can you even be a cultural broker? You have to look at your own mettle. I mean, your own capacity to be helpful to them. I don't want to discourage anybody ever from helping, but you can get in situations and get over your head. So you have to think about this. That's why there has to be a network. There has to be more. You can't be the savior for a family. If you're a teacher, which most of you, that's the context, how far can you go in helping others? Well, you want to find other people that can help others. You want to have contacts in the community. And I've had people do that in the past, and they would actually compile, like in Lincoln, Nebraska, they would compile lists, maybe churches that have helped certain groups. The Salvation Army for material goods, medical staff, maybe even counselors and psychologists if possible. Things like this. But there has to be, because individuals can't be fixer-uppers. You can't just fix up. It's not like that show with Flip or Flop and all that. How people are not houses. Cultures are not houses. You can't put them on the right side and repair them. So those are things that are complex. In the chapter in here, some of the chapters I like, the Laughing Sister is one of the first chapters, is that the complexity, the relationships between the mother and her daughters. And you could see that younger daughter, I don't remember all their names, but the younger daughter went to community college in Lincoln. And she was pretty optimistic. But she was younger. She maybe had not gone through as much trauma. She still had hope. But some of the others, and I forget whether it was them or others, they mentioned they wanted to find a nice man to marry or to have a relationship. And they didn't know how to date because the rules for dating in their culture, they had their mother go along on the date. You know how that wouldn't go over very well. And these are older individuals. Same thing if it had been guys. Think how complicated all the little aspects of culture when you talk about managing, meeting new people, and this may be a relationship, this somebody I might marry or I'm going to date them. And think how much work you go through. I talked to a student the other day. Their sister introduced a young man to the family. They're not even technically dating yet, but it's obvious this is it's kind of moving in a certain direction. And they talked about, well, my great aunt didn't know about some of it and wasn't sure. And everybody had their opinion in the family and they're trying to manage all that. Imagine doing that with a totally different culture. Expectations couldn't be met, they'd be complicated. And you can look in the immigrant background of your own families to see why that was. I'd mentioned before, people marrying outside their church and, oh, it's trauma, it's horrible, somebody's upset, they're not going to go to the wedding. Oh, families are so complicated, right? I feel like Joan Rivers used to say, can we talk? Can we talk? Probably don't remember Joan Rivers. I always kind of liked her. But the interesting thing is that when you look at trying to manage expectations, and you see it just in schools, having to deal with learning a new language and then being academically able to compete and to go on to become a professional in some field, not just say, okay, you can work in this factory the rest of your life. And eventually you're going to wear down and hopefully you'll save enough money for your Social Security. And I think of all these things that Mary Pipher encounters, whether it's adolescents or people, small children, the issue of healing comes up. And so when in your entry this week, I'd like you to talk about that and recognize things. And there's dimensions to being an advocate or to being a culture broker. How much time do you have? What are your obligations to your own family? How can you do this most efficiently? And a lot of that is obviously delegating us and finding people that are serious that will also participate in helping. A lot of these individuals can be found in churches or in organizations in the community. The bigger the community, the more professional organizations, the more grants are available to help people. There was a Lutheran group, and I can't think of the first name of the group, but it was in Lexington Lutheran Family Services, I think it was. And they did a lot of work with, especially with women, young girls, families that were with the immigrant population. A lot of churches in one way or another helped out. Some did more than others. I always emphasize with churches, you better not just be worried about the soul if you don't take care of the stomach and the emotions, and because it can be very manipulative. People want you to go to a church, but then they kind of just grab you and they take you in. But it's kind of like a one-sided bargain that you need to be loyal to this church. But what about the rest of your community? And so that you have to care for the whole person, not just the spiritual part of the person, because the spiritual part is the whole person. I guess that's how I look at it in terms of it's a religious, but that's just one resource. Other resources can be county services and stuff, and it's important to develop a network. Now, I happen to have something that I will share with some of you if you want it, and it's called Everyday Democracy, I think it's called. But they have, it's a site, and I'll send it out to you. I bet you can look it up, Everyday Democracy. It talks about building democracy, building community. It happens to work well with any kind of community concerns where you want to get people of different ages and different, not just the big shots in the community, but to get people and come together and talk about what are some things they'd like to see in their community. It's a huge effort. The good thing about it is they actually come out and teach you how to do it. But this is something most of you probably won't be able to do. You won't have time with it. But if there's some of you interested, I would love to share some of my materials on that. I haven't made it part of this class or even part of my advocacy class for ESL. But I participated in 2 of these back in the early 2000s, and they worked out very well. They involved high school kids as prime, both translators in a bilingual, trilingual, multilingual community. And they also involved bringing people together from all walks of life. And what I was so proud of it is it gave as much voice to a person who didn't speak English, like there was a lady from Guatemala or El Salvador who was caring for her kids in her home, and she was invited and they arranged for daycare so she could give her opinion about what are some things that need to be done. The high school superintendent and principal didn't get any more time to talk than she did, which I really liked. It's very interesting. It was interesting to find that when powerful or leaders in the community don't get the stage, don't get prime speaking time, don't get more deference, they're not, people don't just spread apart and say, oh, please let so-and-so, the mayor or whoever it is, come in and dominate the conversation. It's funny how a lot of those people just kind of disappear. I guess it's an ego thing or something. If they're not number one, they're not interested. Tells a lot about our culture, about power distances. I mentioned that in the videos around, some of the things about culture, that some cultures we have the mayor of the town is very equal to the people, and sometimes the mayor thinks he's way up here. And that depends, different countries, whoever the leader is at the top may not have anything to do with even the middle level people, much less the poor people. But it was a very interesting experience. It's called study circles. And it was a group of people that would meet, and you kind of put all these things in the big stew pot, and you cooked them and cooked them and cooked them. And then the people at the end came up with the 3 important things they thought need to be done, or the 2 important things they thought needed to be done that could be done within a reasonable amount of time. We didn't vote and say, okay, we're going to repave the downtown, or we're going to establish a new school district, things that are huge and complex, but they wanted them to have something tangible and real that they were able to do. And that's good. I mean, when you give children a project to work on in class, it has to be something they can do in class. You don't have them build a model of the Vatican or Capitol building in Washington. It has, even if a group is helping, it has to be a manageable task. And I think that was important. Mary, people always love this book because you have the humanity in it. You have the feeling. And I know I showed you the Lost Boys of the Sudan. There are other films, but that's a good one. You see how utterly hopeless and lost they were. They were literally children who were turned out, who ran away from their village when their village people were killed, and they just hid in the jungle. And one of the things that was so impactful to me was when they said that if you'd had a satellite, and probably did, looking down on Africa, around Kenya or Sudan, that area, you could have seen crowds of young boys from age 2 to 14 years old who were out wandering in the desert in such numbers that you could see them from space. And the only thing I could think of is people always mention that when there were large herds of animals in the old days in the United States, buffalo or any kind of large groups of birds that gather or fly in groups, that you could see them from space. There were so many of them that actually they colored the land. And these children were wandering. And with the Sudanese, many of these children died and starved to death because there was no food. There was nobody looking after them. They wandered for several months. And John Bull, who's in the movie The Lost Boys, he had to bury many children. Without shovels, they didn't have anything. I can't imagine it. I can't imagine the United States didn't intervene in that. You had 10,000 children wandering out in the desert, and you go to help them, you know. Well, you can't shame people after the fact, can you? There's plenty of things to be shamed about now. But anyhow, I just wanted to share this video because hopefully that when you do your discussion, you'll think about in your community. And let me be Mother Teresa on this, you know, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who's a saint now. Do little things. Don't worry about trying to do something like, I'm going to start a community shelter, or I'm going to open up maybe a few books in the local library talking about migrants, or encouraging, helping people to go use the library. Getting a few books. I've shown you some books, and I've got some videos on multicultural literature or books. And just having books about people in your local library so others can learn about them and they can read about themselves. That's important. I've got a bunch of children's books right here down here to my left, my right. Yeah, my right. And these are books on all kinds of cultures. If they're invisible in your local culture, in your local library, it's not helpful. I remember going to Lex years and years ago when I first got there, and I wanted to check how many books about El Salvador do you have in the library? And there was one book, and it was a tourist book from the 1950s, visiting hotels in El Salvador back in the 50s. You know, Lucy, it was like the Lucy show, you know, it was really old stuff. And so they were invisible in the library, and being visible is important because if you're invisible, you're denied. You remember that stage. So I'd like to share that with you. So pick out a chapter or two in Mary Pipher and comment on it. I'd like you to comment on at least 4 other people in there. I'd like you to comment more than that, frankly, but that's all I'm requiring, you know. But do take time to read through those. I've got a lot of stuff of yours. I'm trying to finish up the culture papers. I know it's been a while, and a couple of discussions, and then getting to your interviews. Some of you have had some issues getting those in on time. I'm merciful. I don't teach my graduate class, so I can yell at people and stuff. You can see how aggressive I am, wild and crazy I am. Just my hair. As long as my hair is a little crazy, I'm very thrilled by that. To have hair and to have it a little out of control. All right. Okay, well, I would bid you adieu, and I may put another one on, but I know watching videos, I can tell a lot of you are quite busy, and also it's time to enroll. So if I've got my 826 class in the spring, I'm going to try to accommodate you. I've got the civil rights class in the summer. I'm trying to spread my classes around. I know some of you like to finish everything up in the summer, but I can't do everything. I'm the only one teaching. And I have other classes I teach too. So I will be glad to advise you. You can send me stuff. I'm assuming I'm your advisor. If I'm not your advisor on your audit on MyBlue, then you either have to add me or you're going to have to send me a snapshot of all the ESO classes or graduate classes you've taken and I can advise you. Just give me a list or a screenshot of your transcript or whatever of what you've taken in my area or in the graduate area. I am the graduate coordinator here, or director, whatever. And so I can help you there. And thank you. And I know some of you have got some ill relatives and other issues coming up in your family. It's already snowed here. It's snowing right now. I went around singing jingle bells to everybody. I wanted to just get in the mood. Let's just skip Thanksgiving and Halloween. Let's go straight to Christmas. And then we can have the sales, which they'll probably have before Christmas, because people are always worried that with tariffs and stuff, everything will go up after Christmas. It'll be too expensive. Take care. Bye. Email me if you need anything.